everyone, it's Sharonda from Pay or Wait, and today we're going to be reviewing the Netflix series When They See Us, which is now streaming on the Netflix platform. And the series is directed by Ava DuVernay, and this centers around the true story of 5 young boys who were basically arrested and charged for the crime of rape, which they did not commit. And so the series centers around kind of what happened on that night as these young boys were kind of picked up by the police and coerced into basically admitting to a crime that they never committed, and to how this played out in the court, how this played out in the court of the public opinion in the media, and then also to what happened as they were serving their time, even up into the point where these men were exonerated for the crime. So, you guys, I'm so late on this. But it took me a minute to get through this. This was like very heavy for me, and y'all have been on my necks about making sure that I post this review. So I said, if I don't do nothing else tonight, I'm going to give you guys what you've been asking for. So bear with me. I think this is like my 4th time trying to record a review, but I'm trying not to get emotional because all the other times I got emotional, which is why I have not posted it. So I'm really going to do my best to just really go through the series, how I felt about it. And then also too, for those of you who have already watched the series, there is an interview that Oprah does with Ava, with the actors who play the young boys, and also to the young men, and also the actual survivors, the exonerated Central Park 5 men now. So it's a very great interview that you should definitely watch. I got all of my feelings again, started crying all over again, but I would definitely tell you guys to watch that as well. So going into the first episode, where we quickly cut straight to the chase of, we see the young boys who are in the park harassing different people in the park, and then we see that the police come looking for them and they're taken into the station. And so they seem to have been there all night, and they're basically about to let them go to family crib, like, we'll let them deal with whatever because they ain't got nothing to do with what's going on. But there was a young white woman who was jogging in the park who was found raped and basically left for dead. And so then we have Linda Fairstein, who was heading all of the special victims unit cases at that time. And so for her, she saw these young Black and brown boys, and she was just like, wait a minute, you guys are about to let them go? Like, they did this. And I was like, ma'am, what evidence? Did you do your job? Did you like find evidence and some type of connection, connecting them to this crime? And basically for her, she just had a gut feeling. She was just like, I know that they did it. I don't have no evidence, but I know that they did it. And so the first episode was very hard for me to watch. I think the first episode took me 4 days to get through, because we see that once she basically plants this seed into the detectives' heads that these young boys have something to do with it. Because, and I say young boys, and I don't want to say young men, because they were boys. They were ranging from the ages from 13 to 16. Which was Corey, and we'll definitely talk about, his episode a little bit later. And to watch how, this woman just formulated this opinion by looking at these young boys, not doing any research, not asking the detectives to do their jobs, for her failing to do her job as well, and how they basically just threw all of their rights out of the window. The fact that they questioned these young boys without having a guardian present, because you're not allowed to interrogate without having their parent or guardian present to just make sure that everything is going how it's supposed to go. To see them physically attacking these boys, verbally attacking them, even the mental of just not letting them sleep. They hadn't slept for hours. They hadn't had anything to eat. So just going through like this type of questioning, and then really just forcing these young boys to admit to something that they didn't do, and how they kept telling them like, hey, like, if you want to go home, just sign this paper, just say you did it, and then we'll let you go home. And I'm just like, wait a minute, like, no, they're not gonna let you go home. And so it was just so hard to watch the fact that they were just able to get away with doing this. They knew it was wrong. They knew it was illegal. She knew it was illegal. So for her to be someone who's supposed to uphold the law that these officers, these detectives are supposed to serve and protect, and that they threw all of this out of the window, that they failed to give these young boys rights, and that they basically tricked them into admitting something to make their jobs easier, because God forbid that they just actually go be a detective, go be an attorney, actually research, try to find evidence, try to figure out, does this link anything else that's happening in this area at this time? And it was really hard to watch. It was very emotional to watch. And one of the things that I did appreciate about this first episode was we don't take the time to get to know who these young boys are, because realistically, the detectives, the prosecution, no one took the time to understand what their backgrounds were. Did they have rap sheets before? Are they known troublemakers? No one took the time to know who they were basically accusing of this crime. And so the first episode is just so hard to watch, the distress to, young kids are supposed to be able to trust that adults have their best interests at heart, and to see these people take advantage of that and to lie not only to them, but to also lie to their family, coerce their families into basically signing, away these boys' lives. It was just so crazy for me to watch, but also too, to know that like, this was just in the 80s. Like, was I born yet? I was like a baby when all of this happened. And to know, that's why this is just so important, and why it's so emotional to watch, and why I found the title When They See Us. After watching this, I was just like, this is why we say Black Lives Matter. This is why we say there's an issue with our criminal justice system. Situations like this should not happen, and they should not still be happening, 30 years later. And so for the majority of the first episode, we really just go through their interrogation. We go through the parents frantically trying to figure out where are their children, what is going on, why are they being accused of these things. And then one of the most heartbreaking scenes to watch is with Antron and his father, how his father is there, how his father is watching all of this stuff take place, and basically them threatening his father, saying that they will make sure that his job finds out about some trouble that he got into the past. Just how it's just like, if you're sitting there, your father's there, even the mental thing that would do to you, thinking that, well, this must be okay because my dad's sitting here and he sees that they're doing all these crazy things, hitting me, pushing me, yelling at me. And I think that really helps you understand the friction that happens between Antron and his father as he goes through the court process, and even also like eventually going to jail. And so one of the craziest things while watching this series is, that they didn't do it, because like you're watching it, how this ends, but they find a way, like especially when we go into the second episode and we see them go through this court case, you're just like, but no, they didn't do it. Like, they're going to get off, even though like, in your mind, they don't get off. But to see how the prosecution like hid evidence that clearly shows that none of their DNA was found on the crime scene. And this is why we already know Linda Fairstein and Elizabeth Lederer, trash. That whole scene where Elizabeth, who kind of comes off like she's a good person at first, because she's just like, hey, like, you guys don't have anything connecting these boys to this crime. Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, I cannot prosecute them. But then when you see that she's basically telling the detectives, her and Linda are telling the detectives what to ask, what to basically make them like snitch on one another or implicate the other boys to make sure that they have something that sticks, I was just like, oh my gosh, like, this is someone who is like really a prosecutor, still was practicing law, still was teaching kids up until she basically got bullied into resigning, from teaching at Columbia Law. I was just like, I just don't understand how someone can seriously just, in their minds, just make something to be true when all the evidence is pointing that saying that it's not them. And to see what the parents had to go through of trying to come up with money, trying to find attorneys. When we see like these different attorneys that they had, Blair Underwood, he plays a divorce attorney who didn't know anything about criminal law. Seeing that every time that these young boys had some type of hope, you know, it was kind of taken away. And it was that second episode, like when Linda is like telling her, you need to think about the woman. And I'm just like, ma'am, if you were really thinking about her, you would really try to go and find the person who's truly responsible for this. And so while watching the whole second episode play out, like the trial play out, how Antron's father wasn't there, how y'all, it was so hard. It was so hard to even get through the second episode because I felt like I had all this hope as we're learning all of these details, stuff that they tried to keep hidden that we think is going to save them, but ultimately it isn't. And then the way that they infuse how the media had a large part to play in this as well, I thought it was crazy that it was just like no one did their jobs. The media didn't do their job. No one tried to investigate to see, like, how are these boys interrogated? Like, the confession tapes, like, none of this made sense. And then the whole part where they throw in Donald Trump and how he took out an ad in the page basically asking for them to bring back the death penalty to kill these young boys. The trial isn't over. Everyone's basically made up that they're guilty. It doesn't matter what anyone has to say, that they are guilty. And just how they kind of play that clip as I think it was Yusuf's mother and one of her friends are watching Donald Trump do this interview, and how he's just saying, you know, kind of the comments that people brought up when he was running for president, and why people have been saying, like, he has a lot of racist rhetoric. He has a lot of examples in his past where he's known to be a racist. And so to see how they kind of interjected real footage of him talking, and then even the comment when they were just like, his 15 minutes of fame are going to be up, and you're just laughing because you're just like, yeah, who would have known 30 years later he's our president at this point? And so the way that many could say that this series could be one-sided, but I really felt as though it just shows, like, this is what happened. This is how these young boys ended up in this unfortunate situation, not based on being near the crime scene. They were in Central Park, but as we learn when we go through the trial, that they were on the whole other different side of the park. These boys are in this situation because of the color of their skin, because Linda, in her heart and soul, she just knew that they had something to do with it. And so we see that the boys end up being convicted. And I think that two of the craziest moments that I see in episode 2 is first when I think it was Antron, who was basically, after they put his father on the stand, his father was very absent throughout his entire trial process. He wasn't there for not only him, but his mother. And so when they put him on the stand, and basically how they twist his testimony when he says, like, yeah, you can trust anything that he has to say, and how they try to link that to him confessing to the crime. And when Antron turns to his lawyer and tells him, thank you for trying, and it just, like, at that moment, how he just lost all hope, how he gave up. And, like, even his lawyer looks at him like, it's not over yet. And he was just like, sir, do you see this? It is definitely over. And so also too, when we get to the separate trial where they had to charge the boys separately to try to make the story stick, the confession stick a little bit better. And so when we see Corey and the questioning that she's doing, and how he basically says, you know, I'm not answering any more questions. Like, answering your questions is what got me in this predicament, in which Corey has the saddest story out of all of the boys, because he was only there to make sure he could watch over Yusuf. And then basically they made him confess to everything, pinned it on everyone so he could basically go home, which he was never going to go home. They knew that, but they still lied to him so he would basically admit to something that he didn't do. And so to see him going back and forth with her, and to see kind of his frustration and this outburst that he has, I was just like, oh my God, like, it's just too much for you to really watch, and to know that this isn't television, this isn't entertainment, this is something that actually happened. And it happened to these young boys. Their innocence, their childhood, their youth was basically taken from them. Now, when we get into kind of this third episode, and I like how they basically split the episodes up into 4 different parts. How the first one goes into, like, that night, the interrogation, them admitting to this, being taken into custody, to the second one being about the trial, kind of what all of the parents were going through during that time. A lot of the mothers had a lot of the attention that we saw of them dealing with this and also trying to help their sons at the same time. But when we get into the third episode, we start to see the boys go to jail. And so we know that the four young boys, they went to juvie because they were only 13 to 14 years old. And we see that Corey was immediately sent to Rikers to an adult prison. And so we focus on the four boys for episode 3, where we see them kind of go through the system, them staying in contact with their parents. And then we also see something pretty interesting as to how when Niecy Nash, she plays Corey's mother, how she's trying to talk to Yusuf's mom, and they really didn't get along necessarily because everyone's trying to make sure that their child goes free. But it's a really tough situation when you kind of look at their relationship, especially knowing that Corey is only in jail because he was trying to look out for your son. And so when she talks to her and says, hey, like, can you make sure he writes him? And she was just like, I'm not doing anything to mess up anything like with my son getting out of jail. And so we really start to see the implications of, even though they've served this time and they've gotten out of jail, we start to see that them thinking they have this new start on life, that they're finally free, they can just go on to like just live their lives. It presents a really complicated situation. And one of the things that I found it was just so sad to me was, you're the only people in the world who have went through this experience together, you know? And so the fact that because they're felons now, they can't even communicate with one another. So the only people who understand like what you are going through because they went through this with you, you can't even talk to them because it's violating your probation and you'll end back up in jail. And so I think that that's even more interesting when we see the interaction between Yusuf and Corey's mother, and why it's just, you just feel for them because it's just like they can't even talk to each other. Like, who can they even talk about, like, you know, how life is outside of jail? We see where Yusuf, he's like very optimistic. He was smart before he even went into prison, and how he wants to become a teacher, and when he's getting his haircut, and how he's telling him like, hey, like, you can't do any of these things, like all these things that you want to do, like, you're a felon. You can't apply for licenses, nothing. Can't do any of those things. And you really get to see when Raymond gets out and he's having a conversation with his parole officer, and how he's explaining to him about jobs, and how if someone else is working and they're a felon, like, you guys can't work the same shift, or if there's children around or women around, like, you can't be around them. There's all these like stipulations, which makes it even harder to try to find employment, to try to do the right thing. And so we see Raymond really struggle with that. But also too, his whole situation with his dad and his stepmother, I was just like, she was mad disrespectful. She was very disrespectful. It made for a very tense like living situation. And I never understood like why his dad didn't try to stand up for him a little bit more. I'm sure that it has to already be awkward that you have to deal with like your in-law, like his mother-in-law live with them, and then also too dealing with your wife. But I was just like, I wish that his dad would have gave him a little bit more support. And so we see that, you know, when people always talk about how, you know, felons, they need to go get a real job or do this and that, we finally get to see like that's easier said than done. Like, they really don't make it easy for you to try to live this reformed life, because it's so hard for you to try to do things the right way because you have so many constraints on you. And so it's even harder to watch the young man go through this because he didn't even commit this crime. And so when we see the relationship between Antron, we see that his father was basically absent for the entire time that he was in prison, but somehow in the midst of all of that, he got sick, and then him and his mom kind of rekindled this romance, and Antron still held a lot of anger and a lot of resentment towards his father because he basically abandoned him. And he also felt as though his dad was the reason that he was in jail, because he wasn't there. He didn't show up. He wasn't actively mentally present to make sure that they wouldn't treat him the way that he did, interrogate him the way he did. So it was very interesting to kind of watch that play out in this conversation that he has with his mother. Like, how could you take him back? And that's what we were all thinking. But she was just like, you don't understand. There's like years of things that you just have no idea. And so to also see the implications of the young boys and how that played into the mother's lives, especially with Yusuf's mom, who was basically getting fired from jobs after people would learn who her son was. And so I think it's interesting how they kind of split this up and even show the happiness that Yusuf and Kevin find when they realize they're like in the same group where they kind of have to go report, and how it never ends up right, because basically a part of your probation you have to like take action and admit to like your crimes, and how they were just like, we're not doing this, I'm not admitting to anything that I didn't do, which really shows their strength that even after all these years they still were adamant, like, we did not do this, like I am not going to admit to anything that you have to say, I'm not here for it at all. But side note real quick, because I know we're supposed to be serious about this, but anyone feel like Raymond was like real, like fine? Then even Antron with his little muscles and stuff, I was just like, okay, I see you. But okay, let me stop. Let me get back serious. Okay, we're back. So that's what I really enjoyed about episode 3, to really show the transition from them being young boys into young men and really trying to reacclimate themselves back to real life, and how all of the men, and basically when they fulfill their probation, they're like, we're getting the hell up out of New York. I ain't got time for this. I don't want nothing to do with this. We even saw how Antron changed his name so he can really kind of escape the stigma, surrounding all of these young men. But for all of you who have watched the series, the hardest episode of the entire series has to be episode 4, where we really get into what happened to Corey. No one's had contact with him. They're not allowed to contact one another. And he was sent directly to prison, where he was beat up, abused. Episode 4 was just way too much. And I think it hurts you even more to see what happened to Corey, all because he was never on their list. He was only looking out for his friend. And so it's like, damn, you're just like, he's going through all of this because he was just being a good friend. And then one of the interesting things that I love that they showed about episode 4 was his relationship with his sister, who was transgender, and the relationship between her and her mother, and how her mother was very mean and nasty and kicked her out, and how all these things were happening, how his mom was barely coming to see him, his sister ended up dying while he was in prison, to just see everything that Corey had to go through the countless beatings, to him finally finding a prison guard who looked out for him, told him to do like the solitary confinement, and how no one like cared, what was happening to him. It was so heartbreaking to see. But Jarrell Jerome, who portrays not only Corey as a young boy, but also too as a young man, he just gave a powerful performance. Give him all of the awards. If I don't see him for any awards, we gonna riot. Okay, I'm gonna get my petition started. He did a very, very fantastic job. Even from when we see him do the confession tape in the first episode, to the outburst that he has in the courtroom, and then seeing him kind of deal with all of this by himself in solitary confinement, because that was the only way that he could really protect himself, because he was being beaten and tortured so many times. And to see the guards basically allowing this stuff to happen is just very heartbreaking to see. But I do love how they include the story about his sister, to also show during that time how, transgender people, they were being murdered, and to show the relationship, that she had with her mother, to see how her mother kind of still deals with all of this as she ends up finding the Lord, and then she turns over this new leaf. I was just like, y'all, if like the first episode, but this episode, I was just like, I can't look at this. And to even think of how they said that they didn't even show everything that really happened to him. Like, they couldn't show everything, but because it was just so much that happened to him. Overall, I think he was in prison for almost 13 years before they were actually exonerated. And what's the crazy thing was, when they show us this fight between him and the inmate, I'm just like, what's the significance of this? But then to find out that he was in jail with the dude who actually committed the crime, who later confesses to it, which is why they all ended up being exonerated. But the fact that it took all of this, and to this day, Linda and Elizabeth, they still think that they had something to do with it. They still think that they're not innocent. They've never apologized for anything. The cops have never apologized for anything. All these people still had their jobs. Linda up here making all these books, getting all these money, all these little coins. So like, I mean, that's great and all that everyone's like rescinding like all her awards and stuff like that. But I'm just like, but y'all been knew what she did. You been knew that these men got off. Like, why is this okay? And then it just really goes to show how the criminal justice system has failed us at every level. If the cops would have did their jobs, if the prosecutors would have did their jobs, they would have been able to actually capture the man responsible, because he also went on to commit more rapes after that because the young boys were forced into taking a confession. But he committed so many other additional rapes, and had they had done their job, they could have saved more women's lives from being raped. And also there were more women of color who were being raped. But obviously this was the poster case, the jogger case, as they would like to call it, that they used to really gain like the media attention and really send these young boys to jail. And so it's just so sad, so disheartening. I literally cried for 30 minutes afterwards, because while watching this, I'm just like, I literally need to like read up on like how to coach my future kids. Like if you get, if a cop tries to arrest you, like what your rights are, to tell them like you don't have to say anything until there's like their guardian is present. It's just crazy that you really have to think of these scenarios. And even though this is something that happened 30 years ago, this stuff is still happening today over and over and over again. And to watch the interview that Oprah does with the men, to see how they're still struggling and trying, you can still tell that he harbors a lot of anger. Corey you can tell just watching him that he just been through some things, and the fact that they've allowed them to like bring their story to light, to really help try to raise awareness, to make a change. It's just really sad, y'all. It's so sad. I think the title, When They See Us, is so, because it's just like, if you see us as humans, like if you saw these young boys as human beings and not just these black and brown kids, like you would have done your jobs. You would have went to realize like they didn't have anything to do with, there's no evidence linking them. And so I think this also helps people understand, when you see these young privileged boys getting away for rape, drugging women, getting probation, walking free, not having to serve time in jail, you understand that why racism still exists, is still prevalent. It didn't go anywhere. Why we have issues with who our president is today. He was one of the main opponents of basically saying that these young boys were not innocent. Still to this day says that they're not innocent. Still doesn't take anything back, doesn't apologize for anything. And to think that just because they received this payout, which they had to fight for like an additional 10 years to actually get paid by the city and then split the money, pay their attorney fees, it's just so sad and disheartening. And so I really appreciate Ava for bringing this story to and Netflix for taking this on. And then also too, if you guys do want to learn more about it, there is a documentary that Ken Burns did called The Central Park 5. I think it's on, if you have Amazon Prime, it's on that right now. I highly encourage you guys to watch that as well. But I'm gonna stop rambling. I didn't get emotional. Finally, after the fourth take of this video, I did not get emotional, but I really enjoyed watching this series. It was very hard to watch, but this is something very necessary that everybody, not just black people, need to watch, that everybody from all backgrounds need to watch, to truly understand the injustices that are still happening, that have happened. So many other people have been incarcerated for crimes that they did not commit. And so I just really think that this is something very important that everybody needs to watch. No matter how hard it is, you need to push through it. It took me like a whole week to get through it, but I did it, and I would highly recommend that you watch this, the documentary, and also to the interview that they have now on Netflix. So those are my thoughts on the Netflix series When They See Us. As always, my name is Sharonda from Pay Your Weights, and if you like what you saw today, make sure you hit the like button, hit subscribe, share this video with your friends, and make sure you hit that notification bell. And I love you guys 3000. I'll see you guys soon.